Hello and welcome to Spirit inSight. I'm your host, Lorelei Jock. Today we have Trevor McGrath. He had a spiritual awakening that led him to connect spirit through music and sound engineering. Welcome, Trevor. Thank you for being here.
And thanks for having me on.
I would love to hear a little bit about your story, like what led up to your spiritual awakening, if you saw anything that kind of connected and triggered it, and then where you went from there. Just tell us your story.
Yeah, so it was, to start off, it was pretty spontaneous. I went from one day, I just kind of knew like that there was something beyond. I knew what a third eye, the concept was, to overnight. I had like basically a week straight of what you could call like samadhi, or like an extended bliss experience. And one of the catalysts for this, other than perhaps just, I don't know, divine intervention, was sound, right? So I turned on a video. It had geometry to it. It had a binaural beat to it, and it took me to another place. Eventually, I got into meditation, into the concept of as above, so below. And within this week, I was having a lot of clarity, a lot of downloads, a lot of basically what you could call memory. And we can get more into that, the idea of memory with in regards to sound later on in our talk. But yeah, I was experiencing anything from kind of psychedelic effects during meditation to open eye hallucination, symbolic. Like I would, if I saw the caduceus or the staff with the serpents, they started moving. There was so much, and it was really within this week. After that, it tapered off. I've been into the mystical side of things ever since, but it's never been as profound as it was in that week. I started questioning after a little bit if I had actually died and I didn't know about it, and if I was in a different, like an in-between kind of state, you know.
It's really remarkable. And I know with those awakening type moments, it seems like the whole universe comes alive, and there's like this energy, that connectiveness where everything is a part of you. How did you experience that?
Yeah. So, this is coming from somebody who overnight, I was very into the hip hop music scene. I was very into rap. I would listen to everything. I would listen to gangster rap, so my mind was on all sorts of different wavelengths. And going from that to next thing I know, like I'm just seeing everybody through the lens of compassion. I can't say that that lasted. Like I'm more compassionate than I was, but once again, back to this week, everybody who I saw, I could see in the most purest, beautiful context of who they were, type of deal. You know what I mean? Like there was no like driving by a group of middle school kids before. I would have been like, I remember what I was like in middle school. They're probably little punks and I'd have the judgment, this and that. But like seeing them in that light, I was like, I just saw just their purity, no judgment. I started seeing the unification amongst all beings, the flora and the fauna included. The trees became more lively. In meditation, I would have experiences too where like the ground would kind of, like when I got real deep, it would wave, and it would pulse. And there's just so much. But yeah, overnight really like my heart opened. And I feel like that's the epitome of what the spiritual awakening is. I feel really, I mean, there's a lot of talk about the third eye centers and all the chakras, and it's all about balance, but there's so much to the heart space, the center, the epicenter, that really drives the whole mechanism.
Very much so. In my healings, I call that the divine portal. I see it right below the heart space. Like I've seen universes, star systems, nebulas, all within, and it's like how they're connected to the galaxy. So, and Spirit has really pushed for me, about that vulnerability, that heart space living to connect to everything. So I have to agree with that. So thank you for putting that out there as well. So you said after that experience, you were more compassionate, but you said you didn't quite hang on to everything. But how did you use that experience to move your story forward? Like, how did it change you?
Yeah, so I started studying, of course, meditation, but before that, I was a musician. So sound being a main catalyst, I started looking into what is it about certain kinds of music that makes it have certain kind of effects, right? What makes music sacred? And you can find that in the tuning, and you can find it in the rhythm, the main components. So I got very deep into like the solfeggio scale. I started kind of decoding some things about the solfeggio scale, reading what was already out there. I got into the whole how they tampered with the music tuning kind of aspect, and then through a lot of trial and error, I I found out how to retune the music. And that's pretty in depth. The programs don't really make it easy. They're set for a very rigorous standard. When you look at putting out music, or even being on the radio or putting out a movie, everything has to be what's called FCC compliant, right? Federal Commercial Code. Part of that code in audio is strictly based around 440 hertz tuning. Now, there's a lot to that tuning, that there's nuances to it. So 440 hertz as a tone in and of itself isn't inherently bad. It's the ratios between that and all of the harmonics around it, if that makes sense, right? So you can imagine there's a piece of paper, right, and you have 12 pennies around it. And if these pennies aren't in a perfect circle, it doesn't matter how much you pitch shift the paper up and down, right? It's not going to fix the symmetry of the circle. So, there's a lot of stuff out there saying that, oh, you just have to pitch shift your favorite song and it'll correct it. It won't necessarily. It's more so about changing the spacing between the notes. So long story short, I found out how to do that. It's kind of more rigorous than it needs to be on a lot of these programs, but it's worth it. It's very worth it. The effects. I'm sure you might have seen something about cymatics, correct? So they'll reverberate the sand on a plate or the water in a bowl. This goes down into the visual expressions of what harmony is. So you can see harmony as something that's geometrical, coherent, right? It's symmetrical, it has structure and order to it. Now, our cells are made of mostly water. So when sound, or what is also known as air pressure, is impacting our body, our cellular structure will change. And there's only one of two basic forms. I mean, there's millions of forms of geometry, but either our cellular structure is in a geometric coherent state, or it's in a chaotic, non-symmetrical, non-geometric state. And that goes very deeply as far as how it affects the mind, the body, and the emotions. So.
And with that, how that all breaks down, at least from how I understand, into the cellular level is, expression and how it plays out or can heal at a cellular level, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, all the way down. That's the water level. We could see through sand cymatics, the plate with the sand also forming the geometry. That's particles. The idea of particles is anything from sand to the atoms in our body, as within, so without. So you could say even planets, even whole celestial bodies have the eternal Om as a tone that it's all riding on and keeping something in a coherent structure where it could, facilitate life instead of hinder or contradict life, the life force.
Hence, like the Schumann Renaissance, like is what you're talking about. Kind of.
Yes, exactly.
Right. I think, and we've talked a little bit before this, in my fourth death experience with how sound and voices even carry, why they want you to be mindful of your words, because the frequencies that, that your voice carries, hence they say talk to your plants, right? Not really, I don't feel the oxygen carbon dioxide thing. It's you are putting those frequencies directed at your plants. Right? So how did you end up, because I know from reading your bio, you're a sound engineer, correct?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
what else is your background? I think.
So mainly that, mainly I've been into music my whole life. From fourth grade, I got into a band. From there, I got into hip hop, and then throughout that spiritual awakening, the hip hop started, it transitioned me into making now meditation music, biotuning music, binaural beats, and so on, that basically look to entrain your body in certain ways that puts you in harmonics with the planet, with other planets, even with chakra systems and so forth. As far as frequency, it's a universal language. There's nothing out there that cannot be broken down into hertz frequency, right? Cycles per second. You can break down angles, colors, planetary orbits or cycles, even matter, even chemicals. Everything has an avenue that it can be broken down into a frequency. Rife did, of course, some amazing research with frequency. He was using electromagnetic frequency, but he was figuring out, how to cancel out or create cancel waves for certain pathogens, right? So this can even go down to the level of medicine. Some say vibration is going to be, the new medicine of the future, So.
Yes, and I've heard that in spirit. Has also been very vocal about, frequency, sound, light being the wave of healing for the future. And just, part of what I came away with, as I've said to you, is, that with the intention of my frequency of your voice, you can heal, and it's, and I think that's where, I've heard people do light language as well, and I feel those are just like tones of frequency that like we have forgotten as far as inner action. And I love that you said that hertz is the universal frequency, because so many of, my background is near-death experiences. So many of those people talk about all the frequencies and the colors that play out with those frequencies, when we're out of body. Did you experience that during your transformation experience?
The colors, the frequencies, yeah. I had some visual geometrical designs that would come in. I had, and still on and off, I have auditory experiences. Sometimes it's a certain sound, sometimes it's a voice. Sometimes the voice just says what seems to be random words. In English, even, frequency can step into the realm of even smelling, touch, all of our senses. They're different octaves of frequency. So, like the spoken word, if you look in Genesis, you see that first there was the void, and then God spoke unto the water. So here we see that sound is actually predating light. Just as in the gestation process, our first sense is what we hear when we're in the womb, not necessarily what we're seeing. So, from the void, the sound was spoken unto the waters. Now you have waves, right? Let there be light. Dolphins perform this in the ocean. They make those rings of light by matching a frequency. So every frequency has a wavelength, right? That S-shaped curve. If that wavelength matches the diameter of the bubble, it'll create a standing wave in the bubble, which makes the sound bounce in a figure eight, and it creates a stillness, and that's how that bubble implodes into a ring, creates a toroidal field, as some would call it. So you see literally Genesis playing out by dolphins just vocalizing in the water. Now, what else does this imply as far as technology? It's endless. We're talking about the very core causal languages of creation. It's said that other than consciousness itself, our DNA mainly speaks light and sound.
And it's tremendous to see people as their light body, because it's so different in the sense that, like, how they glow,
Yeah.
basically. And, as some people will speak about, the only reason we look so dense is, the slowing down, because this is the dense area of those frequencies. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, density is a slower frequency. It's a lower wavelength. When you get into sound healing, these lower tones are more grounding, so they have the benefit to put the body in a point where we're connected to the earth and discharge. But yeah, anything that's of a lower frequency has a longer wavelength, right? So that's part of why we can't necessarily walk through the wall. I mean, if we look around and we go by the concept that everything's made of atoms and all atoms are mostly space, what's keeping us from being able to put our hand through the desk? And that's just the difference in frequency at the end of the day, the different densities, the spacing of these particles and such. So yeah, it's definitely that where we have so to speak fallen into a density or an earthly more lower wavelengths, and that's part of why they call the process of awakening the ascension, to rise our frequency back up and to kind of meet it in the middle where we can merge the two polarities, heaven and earth.
Yes. And, I've always said, from my experiences, quote, Eden has always been here. We lowered because of my 2019 connection to one experience. I was shown how, like, Earth was a thought form, like basically like a frequency, and how it transformed itself. But and what you were saying really interests me, because that's how I see it. And so figuring that out, and just knowing that, everything were these frequencies and these light grids, and like, because I've seen the grids and everything else that kind of make all this up. And what you were saying was interesting to me, because, like, I've had friends that have returned from their near-death experience where things weren't solid. All they saw was the light. Like, they had to figure out how to make it solid, touch it, all over it.
Yeah.
So I think that is such a perception that, I hope more and more people start to understand, in the ascension process as well, with how light frequency works. And do you feel, because I'm curious on this, because I know, they've studied brain waves and various things. Now, do you think those correlate to what actually holds your frequency? Like, what frequency you run has to do with your thought forms?
Yeah, it definitely impacts the conscious state that we're in. If you're in a high frequency in your brainwave, say you're in beta, which is a higher frequency, you're going to be anything from generally focused to the higher form of beta, being even anxiety and panic to spun up, right? If you're in the center where you're in alpha, you're relaxed yet you're alert. And then if you go down into like delta, you start getting into the accesses of your subconscious mind, where you're like just on the verge of awake and asleep, very, very deep meditation. The brain waves are huge to understand, I feel, when, especially if you're in the path of sound therapy, because it really shows the main gears that you can facilitate the changing of somebody's consciousness. So a binaural beat is when, for anybody who doesn't know, is when two tones that are slightly different are playing at the same time. Say, in this ear, you have 200 hertz, and in this ear, you have 210 hertz. It's going to create a 10 hertz pulse back and forth. So it's going to make it seem like the sound's going back and forth. And this is what's going to actually impact your brainwave pattern. EEG tests have been done on this. It's been It's had a lot of scientific study to it. Now, intuitively, you and I would figure that that would inevitably be the case, but the I's have been dotted and the T's have been crossed, even scientifically, as to like, yes, through study, this does have this effect. So yeah, you can alter the brainwave states. That's it's part of what a lot of these like cathedrals or ancient structures
Yes.
could do too. They were fine tuning all of that. None of it was by chance, and it was all functional. You know,
Mhm.
their wavelengths.
I've heard of that very much. I think from the beginning of time, Lemuria, Atlantis, I mean, all of these places, all of these temples, and we still, you know, like Chartres Cathedral, you know, all of these different things. But some people feel that's why some of these places have been modified, because they will bring you to a higher state of consciousness by their sound. What is your theory on that?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. It's like a zip file opens when that topic comes up. That's just
Sorry.
one of my no, that's a good thing. It's one of my favorite topics, really, is the structures. So okay, we'll look at it like this, like a stone builder, and this is beyond the whole secret society idea, right? That's a mixed bag, but a stone builder is called a mason, right?
Mhm.
And anything that is of stone building initially was Masonic. If you take that word son or sonic, it means sound. So right there, it shows that at least half of the reason these Masonic or stone structures were brought about was for the amplification and alteration of sound. On top of the idea that, you know, if you're familiar with what an anagram is, you know, you take a word, you scramble the letters, stones, tones, and notes, they have the same letters in them, you know. So there's a lot implying that these chambers, temples, pyramids, cathedrals, what have you, they're very much so used to create and house a certain resonance. You know, you would go in there and you would chant, and the chanting, once again, sound is air pressure, would compress the stones. And in these stones, there are generally it's limestone and sandstone that a lot of these structures were made of. A lot of granite too, as a decorative finish. But they all have at least quartz or calcite crystals to some trace amount. So when these crystals of these structures are compressed, it creates piezoelectricity. And this is how most of our electronics to this day actually work, you know, like a quartz watch. As soon as you have any kind of compression on these certain crystals, specifically quartz or calcite, it creates a charge. This also takes place in our brain and our pineal gland. So you end up creating a charge outside that matches the charge inside. You know, our bones are calcium. So we're built to resonate just like these stones are, to you know, have a sound or a pressure compressing the crystalline structure and creating a charge. And that charge is inside of us in our pineal gland. It's our internal TV screen. It's our internal pixelation. It's sort of the building blocks of what a vision, an internal vision, can be made out of. If you ever get done meditating and you like deeply and you rub your eyes, you'll see all sorts of colors, right? It's because you went into a state of theta generally, and then the eyes have a silicon base in them. So you're compressing the crystal. Seeing visuals, and there's so much to that science with the cathedrals, cath as in cathedral, or cathode or cathar. It means down and through. So it's implying how the energy is flowing. You know, you have the spire, the basic needle of the cathedral being an antenna to pull these celestial energies down and through and into the earth grid.
So a lot of my work and things I talk about is the new earth grid and the work and the reason I came and all of that. So I love that, you know, you're connecting that, because part of what they keep telling me is, you know, and the reason the grid started to die and shift and everything was we're not making that complete conduit.
Right,
So they were
yeah,
telling me like you need to connect to this grid and then the celestial grid, and you need to keep that whole energy, like you said, in the frequencies flowing in order to have that full connection and keep repowering the earth grids. And I
yeah,
just didn't know how you perceive that, but that was part of all the information, you might call it, that I have gotten.
yeah, yeah, certainly. Equilibrium or balance is so key, as so much of the teachings that are out there, they emphasize moving the energy up, and they emphasize the head space. And, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just there's a whole other half, like
Yes.
that idea of the word cath, right? To return this energy back down. So when you have it going up and down, you're circulating the energy. It's, like in the body, it's not getting stuck in your head. Like
Yes.
what would, like if it's a linear path, right? And the idea is to raise the kundalini to the crown, and then you graduate and nothing else happens. What happens then? The energy will get stored, and over time it can create mental, emotional, and physical inflammation of various
Yes.
forms. So for that to be returned downward and circulated, the downward is the grounding energy, right? It's what keeps us orchestrated, right? It gives us our sense of direction in this world. And that's the big part of the missing component. It's actually the feminine energy,
Yeah.
the Mother Earth energy. And this is a big part of why the corruption of the Roman Catholic Church. I'm not talking about all Catholics. I'm talking about the corruption at the highest tiers of that church has suppressed the feminine energy. Right. So we're easier to become lodged in our head, which is the brain it's a computer, it's programmable, right?
Yep.
So
Mhm.
when we don't have our grounding cord, we're easier to control.
Yeah. Yeah, I've found, and it's interesting. I find that, so many people have taught grounding in the sense that, like I told you, we're supposed to be that circuit. Well, if you're constantly putting all that negative charge into the earth, where do you think it is? Unless, that's why I was told a lot of us came here to transmute that. It had nowhere to go. That teaching just didn't ever, quite make sense. I'm like, there's more to this. And that's when they gave me that
Yeah.
whole circulation thing. And that's what, I read recently, and I'm curious on your theory on that, that the Egyptian Ankh was for that. I mean, I think they used it more for sexual energy, but to keep, they they routed their energy like through that. That's a representation of doing that whole loop. Have you ever heard anything along that line?
Yeah, I have. And I certainly agree with it, for the fact that, shape has a lot to do with energy, what kind of energy is flowing and how it's flowing. So if you look at the Ankh, you have a combination of the linear and the curve, which in feng shui or like geomancy is the linear is the masculine and the curve is the feminine. So it combines those two aspects of the as above, so below, or the masculine, feminine, or the celestial and earthly. Um, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's kind of like the full spectrum of the energy you would need to balance yourself.
That makes perfect sense. I think there's so much what I call lost understanding or knowledge, that's kind of gate kept, and
Yeah,
as far as those understandings, people have taken so many teachings either literal, where I feel a lot of them were analogy. And like I always say, magic is just something science hasn't quite proven yet, because
yeah,
everything boils down to that. In I always say there is mysticism, but it's a balance between that and tech. Like you could really break it all down if you really wanted to, because all of my experiences with source and everything else, that's why I say source, has all been in tech terms, like source energy, code, fractal, fiber optics, phase locks, all of these things of how interaction and energy works in this reality, plane of existence, however you want to put that. And that, like, that's why we're mostly water. I always say we're the divine antenna, how that energy flows into the earth grid and how everything is created. What is your thoughts on that?
Most certainly, yes. Science, I agree 100% with that. That science is spirituality that has been demystified. And spirituality is science that is yet to be demystified. And the only divider of the two is just our own mind, our own, maybe our own hemispheres of our brain. The masculine wants to see things linearly and finite, right, and rigid, and so that's very scientific, where you have to put in a rigorous repetition of testing, and you have to account for variables and all these things that it's so face value. But where does the intuition come in? When you get that deep into it, the intuition is much more feminine, and that's where we get into the spiritual side of things. But really, these topics can convert to and from, what some could call the electromagnetic field, others might call God. It's or space, the idea of space. Even, space is omnipresent and particles fluctuate in and out of it, so it's omnipotent. That sounds a lot like God, so we have all these words for one concept. Over time, this has caused a lot of war, be it academic war or literal war with weapons, religion, be it Jesus Christ, Allah, Mashiach, right? All these names that we've put on these gods, and we've fragmented the idea of the Godhead so much that we think we're talking about something different when we're not, and that goes for most things. Language has divided so much over time that half the time people who disagree, if they were to step back and kind of redefine their definitions, they would see that they actually agree about 80%, at least they agree with each other. It's just the definitions, the language. And yeah, so to answer your question, 100%, these two, things are integratable, science and spirituality. And I think that that's where we're at right now as a human race, is that we've come so far with our tech that it started to kind of outstep our intuition. And so we're at like a crossroads to where we can't really go much further with our tech without stepping into dangerous grounds, right? We have to integrate the other half, the spiritual view with it. And once again, the missing half, right, is the feminine energy, just like how the circuit we were talking about, it applies in this too, the archetypal concept that we need that other half to create a whole, a balanced perspective.
Now, I hear a lot of people talk in different, like you said, terminology of, that's what, the Kundalini rising, or that braiding of them, doing that healing within. I always say, I heard you say it, like, I always say within reflects without. Like, if you want to change the world, the work needs to start internally, right? So when you see that from like a sound standpoint, do you feel that sound can be used to create that energetic balance within both energies?
Most certainly. So back to like cymatics, right? If you have geometry, you have coherence. And it's such an archetypal concept that anything that comes from or reflects geometry or harmony or coherence has to do with peace, intelligence, truth, right? These core principles that the world is kind of at large generally lacking in a little bit, I'd say. So yeah, if we tune ourselves, inevitably we're tuning the grid, we're tuning the collective consciousness, if we're all one, so just by listening to pure harmonic tones, we're emanating that frequency out. And if we're all interconnected, then everybody's picking up on that, be it consciously or subconsciously. Either way, it's an effect.
So if I understand it in my own terms, would you say we're all like divine tuning forks?
Yeah, Precisely, yeah. We're all our own tone in the cosmic symphony, you know. And as we all experience, not all two tones are harmonic together. Not every person is going to resonate with every other person, you know, but there is a commonality that we're all a part of the music. So I feel like, you know, to fit the analogy, if we just kind of as a species focus that, like, okay, maybe you and I don't create a harmonic chord together, but we're still part of the music, you know, that we could set so many differences aside and just resonate on some level, you know.
Yeah, what you said before really reminded me of something Spirit has always kind of reinforced, that like the truth is in all things. If you notice, if it's kind of like a common chord, a frequency that runs through all belief systems, all things. They just, like you said, use different language. And some of these others, you know, where there isn't one God figurehead, they've broken down different aspects of that God. Like, you know, like in my quantum hypnosis, you know, I understood that there was elementals, and each elemental of creation, not the earth elementals, but elementals, was an emotion, which each emotion carries a frequency. And all of those needed to be a part of it in order to have what we call life. That's what they showed me. So for me, I'm just curious as far as that, with how that plays out. In your studies, have you found like each emotion like has its own frequency? Have you seen that? Like, does it carry a certain?
I've seen charts. I'm not sure how you would calculate the frequency of an emotion.
I'm just curious.
Maybe through somebody's aura and convert or whatever. But yeah, I've seen charts where they'd be like, you know, grief is very low, joy, love is very high. And you would imagine it is of that general spectrum. I'm not sure if their hertz or whatever measurements are actually literal, or if they're just trying to show a chart. But yeah, but it is frequency, you know. So like our thoughts are of such a high frequency that they can't be heard, they can't be seen generally, unless maybe through like a clairvoyant kind of form. But you know, it's all a bridge as far as stepping something down into frequency, into a lower frequency, is how we can manifest our thoughts onto the earth plane, right? So a lot of this was a common philosophy, just not seen in such a science way, perhaps. But you know, the alchemists or the Masons or the Templars from back in the day, they had a lot of correlation with a concept that has been so dichotomized and seen so dualistically that they got casted out as heretics or as an evil group. And this concept is once again, it's the feminine, it's the earth energy. So when we look at the word demon, it actually comes from the word daemon, which means guardian or knowledge, right? The only difference between an angel and a demon, if you ask me, is the direction it's heading. So so they're of the same light, you know. This is the story of Lucifer falling. So when you take the light and you step it down into frequency, you can manifest matter. Be it through putting out a thought form and manifesting, how most people know how to do, or through other means. In Fulcanelli's book, The Mystery of the Cathedrals, he talks about a strange white powder that would mysteriously form in the cathedrals. And anybody who's into the idea of monoatomic gold or monoatomic elements would look at that and kind of recognize, like, yeah, you know, these certain elements can manifest from literally from the vacuum of space if you put them in a certain resonance, a certain chamber, you know, even a certain light, such as the stained glass windows. That's a whole topic of its own. But yeah, like yeah, it's all something that can be stepped down and stepped up. And as far as, you know, the dualistic mind wants to be like, which one do? Do we step it down? Do we step it up? Well, there's a time and place for both. And I think that's half of what alchemy is knowing when and where, you know.
Exactly. I always say I'm an energetic alchemist, as far as being in multi dimensions at once. And I was going to ask you about that. There's people, there's a thought form that, we have like 7 light bodies. Each is just us living in a higher frequency. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel we do have 7 layers to our aura, 7 main chakras, 7 days of the week, 7 main planets, you could say 12. But yeah, the number 7 goes all throughout. And, much of it has to do, in my opinion, with the light spectrum. If we look at the Pink Floyd album cover, it it tells a whole story, really, how we incarnate. We come from a pure white light or source light, and then we fractal through a prism, right? Be it the veil or what have you, and then we come out crystalline grid. Yeah, we come out the other end in this rainbow body, right? 7 layers to the aura, 7 chakras. And that's kind of how I see where we get persona. Yes. So some people are more of the blue energy or purple, or some people are naturally more centered in the heart. Some people are more rooted in the base chakra, naturally. And so that's kind of where persona comes in. Also zodiacs, you have a system of 12 that come into play. So these are the things that kind of encode what we manifest as from this pure white source light. So they're both true. In one sense, we are all one light, but we manifested here or precipitated into matter to experience the contrast.
Exactly. Oh, the colors.
Yeah, all the colors of the rainbow.
Yes, and I find it really interesting. My daughter and my husband have had experiences where Spirit has showed them, literally the breakdown and how the light rays broke out. And I just think that's so interesting. I think so much of what society as a whole, you might say, doesn't understand is because they don't look any deeper. Some people never quest to look any deeper. We're here, we're having an experience, we're human. I got my 9 to 5 and my children and my dog, and I'm happy. And that's okay too. I feel everybody at a different point of where they want to be in that ascension, so to speak, process of awareness. And I was just curious how you perceive manifestation, because for me, there are some people I know of that have literally manifested things from the quantum or the astral space into physical reality, or been able to one of my family members I saw literally duplicate an item. That's true alchemy. So I mean, how would you say, from understanding sound and frequency, that is possible?
So there was an experiment done in a cathedral where they took 2 bells that were tuned to the same frequency. They just hit one and the other one would instantly ring. This is called sympathetic resonance, right? So you can see it on guitars too. If you pluck an A string, the A string on the guitar over there will resonate. So any 2 things, it shows that any 2 things that are of the same frequency will bridge the gap of space and time and align. In quantum physics, this is called quantum entanglement, where they can take a particle on this side of the universe and instantaneously it will affect one that is like it on the other side of the universe. So to answer your question with manifestation, I feel like that's a key part of that whole concept, and also our perception of what space is, because when we, in our waking life, we see the things, we forget that space is right here, it's right in front of us half the time. When you say the word space to most people, they look up, they think out there, they're not right here with it, and yeah. And that's pretty much all of us as we go throughout our day. We forget, but space, in that sense, it's, once again, it's 99.9999% of everything. So it can be seen as that universal womb that is just subject to your input. You know, it's just waiting for you to form it or shape it, you know, kind of like the idea of computer screen. You know, it's the pixelation of ones and zeros, light on, light off, and that this space is just this infinite potential. And if you can create these ones and then steer how those ones interact with each other, you know, you create something that's of form on the manifest side of the veil. So
it's interesting to think of it that way. Like I've had experience where I've literally seen, you know, like how Neo does in the Matrix with all these numbers and letters, they're forming words and falling, or literally like the Fibonacci sequence, all the codes coming down in front, glowing in front of my face, all of those kind of crazy things. But do you feel like they're not crazy, but you know what I mean? Like how many people run around with codes? But how would you say, like I was always told those, you know, they're light codes, like they're like each of us carry pieces of the puzzle, a light code, like we agree to meet to share that code. What is your theory on that?
yeah, I feel so much of this is preordained. But it's like a paradox too, because we can also shift the timeline because we always have free will. So maybe we signed up before we manifested here. We signed up for a certain structure, and throughout our time here, that which was of least resistance and implied that we were on our track.
Mm-hmm.
But if we push against, we can sway from the track and create a new one, and that's our free will. But yeah, like there is that kind of linearity to it in that sense. But ultimately, I see all these timelines are overlapped right now, and I think when we start hacking into that idea too, you know, like that on some parallel subdimension, I'm sitting here in the exact same way, but I have like a blue hat on.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another one where I have a red hat on, you know, and all the way down to infinite possibilities. Like, what if when we start not just philosophizing on that, but embodying that idea that you can manifest in ways that people would never believe?
Yes.
Like how you were saying, you know, one of your family members, I think you said, like, copied something, you know. There was a man by the name of Francis Bacon, and also known as an incarnate Saint Germain. And it said that he always had like ungodly amounts of money and gems and this and that, and nobody knew why. He didn't go out there and like work per se for it. But he came out with a statement as to, you know, that like he was getting questioned and kind of pressed for his alchemical knowledge of things, and they were asking how do you do these things like precipitate gemstones from the ether? And he said something akin to, I have the power of nature in my hands, you know. So that comes to my mind when you told me about your family member who did that. Like if we look at our hands, we have a positive and a negative charge,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's the polarities of creation right there. We can see, you know. So you put the two together, like you put man and woman together, and you create the child, the Holy Trinity. You know?
And it's interesting, you know, and I love what you said about timelines, because I'm a big proponent of speaking about that. And I've experienced it like a choose your own adventure book, and like where if I didn't make this choice, this happened. And I've seen timelines where I've died, somewhere I've lived, somewhere, all of these other things, like you said. And I always tell people, so I wanted your theory on this, so let me ask this. When my experiences happened and the understanding I was given is we each are manifesting our own timelines. We only share it by this quantum entanglement, or what I call phase locks, when we agree to have these experiences together, so to speak. So that's in where I always laugh when I say, well, this person, it was blue shoes, this person, it was yellow, you know, and from like, even when you hear like a medical statement or a police officer's report, where like three people experience the same reality, totally different. There's maybe like three things that match up in the whole report, right? And I
Yeah.
always like, they're experiencing their reality differently. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. Perception itself seems to be subjective. Like, is a 6 a 9? It depends on where you're standing. I think it even gets down into what shape is the earth, like I'm not a proponent of flat earth specifically, and I'm not going to talk too much because I don't want your comments to go crazy, right? The comment section. But like there's so much in the integration of the truth being right in the middle of these polarities. So what really so like you're saying, like with the car accident, somebody experienced a car accident, all three of them had a different story, they all saw the same thing. Perhaps the average or the more universal truth is a synthesis of kind of what comes about from all three of them, and as far as timelines, just what was it, 2 weeks ago, my partner and I were out driving snowy New Hampshire roads, totaled our car on a turn. We were fine, nobody got hurt, but as far as timelines, it's order out of chaos. Did we get in a car crash, or were we just avoiding a 10-car pileup? It's so easy to think that we're off track when something that we think bad is happening, but we'll never know what we were avoiding. You know what I mean? You will never know what exactly that led you to that would have manifested as something that's truly better for you or keeping you on the track you're supposed to be.
No matter what happens, I'm always like, this or something better, in the sense that like I've lost my keys, and then like you said, left 10 minutes late, and I passed a huge accident. Nothing, everything's synchronistic, and for the highest good is how I look at it. Because especially if I am helping manifest it, right? Why, other than for experience, but every, like what we would discern as bad led to a very big positive. But in the moment, it is just so hard to get through. Like,
Yeah.
why am I being punished? That kind of thing. Like, my computer broke, but because of that, I met 3 other people I never would have met. All of these things happen and compile. And when you read that, in a universal state, is that everything, I always say, if you follow synchronicity, that's where the miracles happen. Because nothing is random.
Yeah. It's all ordered. It's all order out of chaos. Yeah, the butterfly effect.
Yes.
Like, okay, you've lost your keys and you're late for work, but what did you avoid, or what did that cause you to come into? That whole key analogy is kind of interesting too, because it's so much of our spiritual path. We end up seeing that when we first awaken, that everybody, I'm sure everybody has done this. You're about to head out the door and you're like, where are my keys? And you tear your whole house apart. And you have no clue where these keys are. You're looking like under things that they wouldn't even fit under at this point, because it's just illogical. You're like, come on, like where are my keys? And you finally give up and you sit down and you relax. And as soon as you sit on a couch, you hear a jingle in your pocket. And they were on you the whole time. Like the answers are within us this whole time. Everything we've needed, we've been able to pull from ourselves within our own internal means. But yeah, before we become conscious of that, we're all of us quite often are just tearing the house apart looking for the keys.
Exactly. And I think that is the journey back to self, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. That self-realization where we remember that we are a fractal of the whole, and we're interconnected with it. We can communicate with it in any way we wish, really. It reads our mind, it reads our thoughts, it reads our emotions.
Yeah.
It's a million languages.
Right. And then there's the universal language, right? It's interesting. Keys was one thing. I remember when they said, like, your voice carries a key. You need to start speaking your truth. be authentically you. I mean, I think spirit is calling for that, especially now for everyone, but that was part of my death experience. So I just have to show this. It's gotta be funny. I always put this out when I do anything or my interviews or spirituality. I started life with the skeleton key house, and that just reminds me of the keys that we all hold, for each other. And the key to that awareness, I think, has always been within each of us.
Yeah.
It's just when we decide to open that door, when something triggers it. And this is where I wanted to talk to you about that as well. That key, because I have had many remembrances and experiences where I have literally, being this multidimensional being, planted things throughout my timelines to bring my own awareness. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, like I've felt traces of that. I've felt like coming out of meditation, I saw something get back around the corner, and right off the bat, I'm like, that was me in a different timeline. Yeah, there's so much to it. I think even when we get into the realm of like ascended masters and stuff like that, there's so much more than the linearity that they're this being and you're you. It's these all matter is a thought form, essentially. So this gets into a different realm of things. One time when I was meditating, I was laying out in a chair and I had my head facing the sun and I had my eyes closed, and I got this vision of Saint Germain. He reached through the sun and he handed a rose, like he put it into my chest, right? To anybody who's familiar with the Rosicrucian kind of idea, that all would make sense. But about a week afterwards, every time I saw myself walk by a mirror, I saw his face, like on me. And I think like, and I'm not saying anybody's wrong for doing this because there's so many nuances, but how I personally took it is that I didn't feel like I was an incarnate of Saint Germain or anything. I think it's just these archetypal energies can manifest through us in all of these ways that are beyond just the material or the linearity of like past lives and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I know various people who have had experiences that have shown them that they're Isis in a past life. And I don't disagree with any of them. I'm not sitting here thinking, well, who is the right one? When you get into archetypes, you're like, yes, there are people who are going to have memories of being Isis because it's this spirit that we flow through everything as. We can look through all eyes, and what if something else is looking through your eyes or my eyes right now? It's all one melting pot of energy.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. That's another topic I talk a lot on. And I've had the awareness of looking through others' eyes and being, and even in my death experience, I went into each of my loved ones and I saw and heard everything they were thinking from their own perspective. And I became one with their consciousness. And I've done that in like a quantum state where here I am, and I'm like, this isn't my body. What am I doing here? And so that's really interesting that you say that, and especially the lives thing with we have so many Magdalens here, so many various things to bring that energy in. In my Beyond Quantum Hypnosis, like I said, I was given the understanding that like there was all these fractals of what I would call love or the divine feminine put in throughout the whole Earth grid in timelines and everything they showed me in more than different ways. They also showed me in a technology way how that code, I call it, was put through all different people through different things. And I have this thing I call about when I do my work called what I call the soul cloud. And this is how I understand it. So I just want to ask you about this because from my understanding, like there's prime creation, and then there was a breakdown to the first original thought forms, and then more and more thought forms, and they each have these, what Spirit told me, personality complexes. So when we come down here, we have this availability of somewhat like a flash drive. It's your soul cloud of all these different energies and thought forms and things and knowledge through zillions of different lives going on at once that you can tap into. And even my mother's after death communication of that she's still working and doing different things through me and like my daughter, because she's able to connect through that energy to finish out and learn and do different things through us. That I think when you're in that state of what I call surrendering to divine flow, you are that conduit for, all of these energies and thought forms. So you might just be embodying that particular energy in that point in time to work through something or to aid you on something that you chose to move along on your path with, or an understanding you were searching for. How do you feel about that?
I feel that is a concept that has been expressed in multiple different ways all throughout the world. In the Eastern world, you see that one of their theories is that a family will reincarnate together.
Yeah.
They'll just switch roles. The mom might be the son might be the daughter might be the father. That's the Eastern world. You take it all the way over to the other side, and the Native Americans are talking about, interestingly enough, certain tribes say 144,000 ancestors, right? That correlate with our subconscious mind. So what draws the line really between ancestors, past lives, Akashic records, once again, back to the terminology, are these all just words that are expressing different maybe facets of the same idea, that we're all, we're a conduit. The body is a vessel for anything that that resonates with it. That's that idea of sympathetic resonance. So yeah, spirit guides, even, if somebody's interest is music, they're going to have perhaps a spirit guide that is, an archetype of music. Is that why they were into music, or is that why they had that spirit guide, kind of the chicken or the egg thing? I think it's kind of both. It's not really linear. It's like we descended. Yeah. So like kind of how I see it too is like there's the source, the omnipotence, omnipresence, and it branched into its masculine, feminine self. And then from there, it fractaled into infinity. And that was all of creation. And here we came trying to understand the fragments. So we started putting things in one of two boxes, right? And I think that was needed to organize it and to like bring some kind of structure to it. But I think we ended up leaving it in one of two boxes instead of finding the third, right? The center point where they integrate. So it's almost like the third step leads us back to the union, because it covers the whole spectrum and everything in between. So yeah, from the Godhead to the what some would call the demiurge, or what in Egyptian they call the netters, right? Those that they're like lords in a sense, they're the prime presentation of an archetype, but they're still in a form or a personification. Our human mind generally needs a form for us to interact with something. That's our logic. So we personify Thoth or Tahuti, right, from Egypt, as a bird head man, and the list goes on. We've personified God as someone in the sky. I think it was Sadhguru. He said something real good. He's like, to the dog, God is a big dog in the sky. To the bird, God is a big bird in the sky. And you can't argue with that, because it's a mirror of the perceiver. It's a reflection, So is God a man? Is God a woman? Is God formless? The answer to that might be all of the above if God is omnipresent, right? If you're omnipresent or omnipotent, there's nothing that you're not.
In my experience, it was the most phenomenal light you'd ever see, right? My husband's, it was an amoeba. No, protozoic, excuse me. But they all
Interesting.
started off as this like telepathic voice, but it's just kind of interesting. And, I often say what you're saying is kind of it. Part of my whole understanding of things is our body interprets and creates how it reads a frequency. So Spirit has showed me recently, like at this frequency, when this happened, or these words were spoken to me, this is how I reacted. Or I had a cold at that time. So now, because it reads this frequency, it remembers cell memory is cold, it creates cold. Is that, and so when they break it all down like that, like, same with grief. When you hear about death or this or that, most people get that like emptiness or that weirdness in the pit of their stomach, so that's the frequency coming in. You're reading grief, and that's kind of how empathy works. Like you were saying, that resonance of this is how I feel, but the body reads it how it felt the last time, from what I call soul memory and cellular memory. And so that frequency comes in that. So to retrain that is kind of like you were speaking, like almost like reprogramming the mind. Like I always say, the mind is the ultimate alchemist as far as how that perceives through our filter. Now, because you do all this work with frequency, and I've seen bioacoustics where frequency can be used to heal, and different sound notes can use to be healed certain illnesses and certain personality complexes and things, as far as their OCD and various things like this, as far as that. Because my understanding, and I'm not sure how the technology exactly works, but it can read things in your voice, like literally your personality, like if you're joyful, happy, what you're speaking about, and even like the illnesses that might be portraying in your voice. Now, Spirit has showed me, like, I just have a natural ability to read that one. That's why I usually like talk to people. And I think that's a lot to do with talk therapy, is like you're reading it and we're each reading each other's frequency when we speak, because our voice carries that frequency. I'm just curious on your thoughts on that, because you do so much work with this and have the science behind it. And I saw in your bio that you also do these healing acoustical things that are specific to people. Can you tell me how all of that plays in, if you would?
Yeah. Well, first I'll start by saying it's really cool that you can just read that intuitively, because there are also like a whole like technology bases based off of doing what's called a vocal print, right? So your voice would run through the hardware, once again, compressed quartz crystal, creating signals. They do what's called a Fourier transform, and to make a long story short, you get an algorithmic frequency as a shape, so it turns your voice into like an algorithmic shape that can be read, and from there, yeah, you can determine, illnesses, hormonal deficiencies, imbalances, even energetic components like chakras, nadis, meridians, and so on and so forth. The human voice, it's a little bit, I mean, obviously it's different for everybody, and especially from male to female, but there is, in a healthy human voice, there's a core frequency that is about 110 hertz. And this frequency range, so 110 to 112, this has been scientifically proven to activate the right hemisphere of the brain and to silence the language processing centers of the brain. So when somebody has a healthy voice and has that spectrum, when they're talking to somebody else, they can put somebody else in a right hemisphere kind of state, to where their intuition is coming on and they're receptive to the words that are being spoken. They can put them also in an alpha state, just based off of the purity of their voice, if it has that spectrum to it. With the customs, I do work for, like people might come to me and be like, I love Chartres Cathedral, or this structure or that. Can you make me a sound that's based off of that? And there's a calculation for figuring out the room acoustics. but I do planets, chakras, there's chakra tones. But the most common one I come across is people want help with their anxiety and their trauma, right? And I think all of us as a whole, no matter how far we are in our spiritual path, we all could benefit from pulling those strings as well, you know? So when you get into the brain waves, the theta brainwave has been found to have really great effects for helping people with their trauma, helping the memories that need to come up, but in a gentle way, to where it's not an overload and you're re-traumatizing yourself. So, you know, when you put like a theta pulse to like 110 hertz, that frequency that activates the right brain, you start concocting kind of like these physical reactions that put your body in the most optimal state to not only remember what you need to remember to release, but to actually physiologically create certain hormones and neurotransmitters that will help the body release those built up energies from it. So in the nervous system, you have the fight or flight system, or the sympathetic nervous system, and you have the parasympathetic nervous system. And these come with their own neurotransmitters. You know, some are mainly relaxatory or inhibitory, and some are excitatory, like adrenaline. And the brain waves can actually they kind of tune or steer which ones are happening. And it's been found that the theta brainwave can create a more parasympathetic state where the energy can flow through, you can release, you can regenerate, you can get out of the fight or flight anxiety state and go back to a restorative state. The body knows exactly how to heal itself. It's always wanting to, but we live a life where we're so projective. Generally, we're in society, we got to drink coffee and then go to work and memorize stuff and be high functioning, and it does not create a good space for the body to heal itself. It actually puts us in the opposite mode of this nervous system. So through certain entrainments with sound, it can have phenomenal benefits of getting us into that state where we can relax, release, let go, resolve traumas over time, and so on and so forth. You know, I see it as when we get through that layer of the traumas, we get to a deeper layer where we start having more and more memories, be it from this life or from past lives. You know, everything comes to the surface, and for us to get to the gold, we have to go to the initiation. You know, there's a demon at the entrance of every cathedral. There's always the gargoyle, you know, guarding the deepest secret. It's kind of that metaphor where, you know, yeah, we might have to resurrect some of our deeper traumas, but over time, you know, it manifests as a remembrance that we needed.
Yeah, very much so. And I feel like with each of that, when the work I do is I take people back into that, or even their first incarnation fractal is what I call it. And it's interesting because there's, like you were speaking in the beginning, that whole bleed through of the timeline, and just how much the personality complexes and different things affect who and how we are. You know, and sometimes I'm able to open a portal, or what I call it, and have these conversations with each other. And it's interesting because they'll be like, well, that, you know, yeah, that's for me. They get that from me. You know, and it's kind of interesting, like how much of that carries and bleeds through that, you know, like you said, that the frequency and I think like it's like this huge energy net of light and frequency and the interconnectiveness. And I think the more you try to separate from that, the more you lose that oneness where we, in the
Yes.
duality, pulls it all apart, and therein lies the chaos.
Yeah. Like, and you know, it is a net. It's a grid, right? And I think after a while, some people start, when they see the grid, they start feeling like, uh-oh, this is a net. I'm trapped. You
Yes.
know, and it's and in some schools of thought, it turns into like Saturn being evil and don't walk under the ladder, and the black cats and the superstition kind of that comes with a lot of that. And I can see why, because, you know, I mean, yeah, there's a dark side to it, but there's two sides to every single coin, you know, and when we start seeing that this net that you're talking about, or the grid, it's not some malevolent group that casted a net over the world to harness our energy, or the cathedrals. Like, the cathedrals aren't just sucking our energy to send it to some demigod. It's that these are containers, and there's a time and place to contain energy and to emit energy. We would never have this physical earthly experience if it weren't for our infinite energy being in a container of some sort, which, you know, through feng shui and resonance is a cube. It is a cube. You know, it's a storage unit. You know, it's the cube matrix, or the 6-base.
I always
The
call it
hex.
the Allspark. I call it the Allspark.
The Allspark, yeah. Yeah, that's an
So,
interesting one, isn't it? Because his name was Megatron, and then you have
yes.
Metatron, who has the cube. You know, where do they get these ideas? Yeah.
Well, so much truth is hidden in plain sight. I always say with divine, you know, that's where Spirit Insight, the name of the podcast and the work I do, came from, because Spirit said, you know, with divine sight, you can see those light codes in all things, like the truth and the authenticity of what is real and what is illusion, you know, that duality illusion. So I think that's very interesting. And I know, you know, when you mentioned Earth, I was giggling because I didn't mean to smile. Like, my daughter in her experience, you know, they showed her with like a donut, you know, where the tree of life is the energy conduit coming through and coming down, and then all of and from my experience, I kind of understand what she was talking about, where she said that there was like these main beings, but then there was all these little ones going on this track around these cords of light. And to me, from what I was shown, it's like there was these core entity energies, and then each of these, as they figure it out and they rebraid each of these energies in to themselves, and then they all go up, and it was this cycle she was showing me. So it's kind of interesting. So, you know, it depends upon if you're talking about Earth as to how it manifests in physical matter, how it manifests energetically. But so I had to giggle about the Earth donut.
Yeah, and that's a universal shape. If you look at the field, the toroidal field, or what's the shape of the magnetic field, if you look at it from a top-down view, it is a donut. You know, it does have the circle in the middle where it goes to the 0 point, and it has the, you know, the circle around it because it's a sphere. You know, and that is the most universal shape in all of creation. It's what's keeping anything from the electron and the proton of the atom together to our body. You know, we have that field around our body. It's keeping our body together. It's keeping the earth, all of its components and particles together, and it's a contract, or a covenant. If you look at the word, you know, covenant, you probably think of the Ark of the Covenant, right? This ark, you know, that stores a contract, and that there is a contract between matter to stay composed and to know when to break apart. And that's much of what the alchemists work with, as far as breaking things down and rebuilding, you know.
Yeah, that I call it like energetic agreements, you know, as far as like, you know, somebody's like, well, why'd my computer break? Well, it didn't want to be a computer anymore. That energy wanted to move on.
Yeah.
Would you want to be, you know, energy's always moving. It's neither created or destroyed. So that's, you know, I figure everything is solid matter by agreement, you know. And when one, you know, this big boulder, some of it says, no, I don't want to be a boulder anymore. Yeah, then it's pebbles.
Yeah.
But how it all breaks down for our physical reality is much more interesting.
Absolutely. You know, that whole energy can't be created or destroyed. I was watching this video. I don't know if you've seen any of Terrence Howard's work, the actor. He has some great philosophy. It's very interesting. And he was talking about how there's another side of math that we aren't seeing. And so he breaks it down like this. He basically says 1 times 0 equals 0, right? That's what we all agree upon. But if you already have the 1 and the 0, then how could 1 turn into nothing if energy cannot be created or destroyed? Where did the 1 go? You know, so it is kind of like a nitpick nuance, but I think those little subtleties lead to big revelations at the end of the day. You know, it's definitely like something to at least ponder. You know, like how can something turn back into nothing, and if it did, where did it go? You know.
Yeah, and the black hole. You know, I trigger a lot of people because what I describe as the voided creation, the boxes of potentiality of all the things that can be created. I always say, people say, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I said, no, they both existed in the void of potentiality. Neither came first. And that's kind of how I see your 0 and 1 story.
Yeah, like in physical gender, it's the chicken or the egg. Yes, the woman gives birth, but how did the woman come about? And it's this cycle that there is no linear beginning or end. It was either a miraculous manifestation or not. So
I always say
it's
that's what
interesting.
keeps us infinite.
Right.
And when you were saying about the square, I always say, we're the soul battery, or the battery. That's why I was saying the all spark, because that energy feeds all of existence into infinity. We wouldn't be infinite without that constant contrast, that pull, that need to always be one again, to the divine feminine, masculine, that struggle, that contrast keeps us flowing into an infinite space. And I didn't know how you see that, but that's kind of my understanding of those energies. And the magnetic field, some people say that's where the law of attraction, the type of things come in to, like, this is your frequency and you'll attract anything that aligns up with that frequency. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I feel so. Magnetism is the least resistance, right? So when we try to get something, usually we're like work hard for it and we stress it and we like cling to it and clutch it and don't let it go. And then does it ever really manifest how we wanted it to? There's that other state where you might put out the intent, but then you let the magnetism do the rest. And if you're really a vibrational match, it will come to you. So working with the magnetic field even is literally part of how they would manifest. It's the feminine energy. It's the receptive. It's how we receive. And they would use certain mathematical ratios and constants and their building structures to generate, a toroidal field. So they're within this magnetic shape where their intents can be magnified or amplified and received more optimally. If you look at the word mag, it means grand, magnificent, right? We also get the feminine figure of Magdalene, right? Who resembles the Grail. And if you look at the shape of this magnetic field in the center of it, you see that it comes to a chalice shape. So there are so many things as far as what people talk about the Grail like it's this and not that. I feel it's a multi-dimensional allegory. It is undeniably shaped like the uterus, the Taurus field, right? Of the womb. It's the divine feminine. It also has a masculine component with the sword. The sword was another Grail symbolism. But yeah, so the Grail kind of being something that is encoded in various different ways through structures that they would use to tie back to what you're talking about, manifest or put things out into the Earth's grid. So, they would be part of the collective consciousness.
And I love how you break down words. I just have to say that because that was the other thing with my death experience, and I do a talk about the power of words. You know, like that's what, like I'll know, I try never to say mourning. This is so weird, but the frequency that is, mourn means to like mourn the day, death of something. So you're breaking a new day. The last one has died, you know, and because they told me, watch your words, you know, like words are important, you know, because there's so many things in our society, especially if you look at the English language, that have a negative connotation in the sense of, and even the frequency they carry, because the collective thoughts have fed that energy frequency. So I find that very interesting that you break down words, because there's so much symbolism and so much meaning in them that I think we don't look deep enough at. I mean, have you studied words a lot as far as that? Because I could tell by how you break them down. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, phonetics or etymology, the idea that okay, so like back in like say ancient Egypt or any of these ancient civilizations, they had one symbol that expressed a whole concept. And over time, that is fragmented to where now we have one symbol that's just a part of one word. And then you need many words to express a whole concept. So see how it steps so far away from a telepathic language to a language of strictly analysis and reading. You know, in the Bible, it talks about language dividing man, and how this is essentially what Babylon is, you know, to babble on, where we're speaking all these words and we're speaking these spells, spelling the spells and the curse of curses. And this can all be for better or worse. In Hebrew, they had 22 letters originally. They have 5 extra that can be pinned to the end of a word, but 22 letters in their alphabet. And this is one of the mother languages, one of the many. But this 22 structure is very interesting, because you see this also in the cranial bones. We have 22 bones that form our skull, you know, so you can kind of see the correlation between each letter sound resonating with a different part of the head and actually creating a code of resonance in our brain. You know, the word alphabet comes from alpha and beta, you know. If you look at those in the brain waves, it's the heart in the head, you know, it's just the connection, you know, the communication system. So yeah, 22's in the tarot too. Or they say we have 22 codons out of 64 in our DNA, you know, they like language. So whenever you see numbers, you know, you can see that if there's a system of 22 and there's another system of 22, these are going to align. They're going to be related somehow. And that's another idea of sympathetic resonance. 72 is one that you see all over the place. 72 virgins, 72 accomplices to Osiris's resurrection. If you look at Jacob's ladder, traditionally, it was said that there were 72 steps and an angel on each step. So you have 72 angels. And then if you flip that over to the story of Solomon, he summoned 72 demons to build the temple. So you have 72 ascending and 72 descending. You know, you put those together and you have that number we all know of 144 or 144,000 if you times it by 1,000. So yeah, language has, it's a way to reverse engineer, I think, that fragmentation back to where we can get back on the same page. We can actually start stepping back into a universal telepathy with each other, you know.
Very much so. And I know with that, and you know, being able to read thoughts and things, not always the best gift. Been there, done that. But I think it's interesting that you say about those codes. And I know, I mean, like the symbolism of various, what I call light beings, celestials or whatever, you know, that's all they use is those symbolic images. And there's like, I can't even express how much information can be in one single energetic code picture. And I remember, like, sometimes the akashics play out for me like mini movies, like you're watching a screen, but there's also this holographic looking screen that has these literal power symbols that you're talking about that you can just hit and get all the information of the universe. You could just, and some people say that that was truly what the tablets were like that Moses received. They weren't these 10 commandments. And in my husband's experience, he was told, no, there was no such thing. I don't want to trigger people, but I'm just saying. So I didn't know if you've ever heard those stories as well, but and I know my daughter downloads these image power symbols, you know, so I'm just curious, do you see those? Do you ever get those codes? They're like,
Yeah, I do. I do. It's sporadic for me, you know, like my visual experiences or my auditory experiences, depending on where I'm at in life. I might go 6 months and have nothing, and then I might turn around and have a week where it's just keeps coming.
yeah,
But
same.
to answer your question, yeah, I've had symbols where I've drawn them out, and sometimes I find that it's almost like a certain language, like say, you know, I see the symbol, I'm like, oh, that's kind of like Chinese mixed with this Hebrew letter. If you were to
Yeah.
overlap them, sometimes it's nothing of this earth. But yeah, you know, symbolism of any sort, it speaks directly to our subconscious mind. So if you take somebody who might not be into symbolism at all and you show them, say, a light language code, or even like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man drawing, they might look at it, walk away, forget all about it, think they didn't get anything from it. And then maybe a week, maybe a month later, they'll have an epiphany. You know, so it speaks, like you cannot walk away from seeing these things without getting some kind of information. It's just some people get it consciously right off the bat, and they learn to then read it. And then some people, they might not be in tune with it, but it's still uploaded, you know. It's still a remembrance.
Yeah, there's still a seed, a key that'll unlock when it's meant to, but you've given the code or you've received the code. That's how I look at it. And I find that very interesting that I just had this sense that you got some of those. And it kind of reminds me too of how like basically Reiki is, you know, is those are like various symbols that do certain things. Like my daughter's downloaded some healing ones and some other ones we haven't, you know, they'll give her a vague meaning what they mean, but you know, and it's always interesting, but how they play out and what kind of information they may carry, because it's not, like you said, a language we're familiar with. A lot of them seem to have eyes. Eyes are a big thing, like the Egyptian
Yeah.
eye symbols, I think, come with a lot of different things, or these weird Z-looking type symbols and various things like that. And I'm sure it's probably a language long forgotten, or that, I mean, as far as our particular stream of consciousness. And there are talks, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this. I know it doesn't have to do with necessarily what you do now, but that whole earth recycling thing, like the Big Bang, and it starts all over, and all the timelines contract, and then you get to that void of nothingness, and it goes all back out. Because that's something I've seen from my experience. What is your theory on that?
I feel strongly about that is the case. I kind of see it like the cosmic in breath and out breath, right? So the inhale and the exhale. It's interesting because there was a time cycle called the precession of the equinox, and it's about 25,920 years to 26,000 years, you know. Everybody will say something different, but it's in that realm of things, right? So we'll just say 26,000 years. Well, throughout one day, on average, we take about 26,000 breaths. So if you look at that as a fractal idea, that there's this expansion or contraction, you know, there's this cosmic inhale and exhale that's found within a cycle where everything resets, you know, everything comes to and from the void, perhaps. You know, and once again, back to what you were saying, the chicken or the egg, you know, like we want to look at the Big Bang or the expansion from the void, like that happened and it's just going to keep going out forever. But what happens when the universe inhales, you know, it all comes back to the center, and it's this frequency. You can see this with sound, you know, a sine wave goes up like that and down like that. And there's a line, the median, and the up symbolizes the positive air pressure and the down symbolizes the negative air pressure. You know, if you push these two S waves together, you have a circle or a cycle, you know. So things always come back around full circle, or they say history repeats itself. I feel like we're on a spiral, you know, where like history will repeat itself, but it'll do something different each time. Because if it was exactly the same, it would, you know, it would just be a circle, and then what would be the point anymore after one repetition? But yeah, we're on a spiral where we're creating these different timelines, manifestations within the confines maybe of a certain repetition, you know, a certain structure. Like it's like creation knows it can go as infinite as possible. So it's like it's trying to add maybe some bumpers to where it steers itself in a trajectory, but within that it's a paradox because it can be infinite within the confines of itself. You know, it's all paradoxical. It can do whatever it wants to do. You know, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and you know what they've shown me from different timelines and different things is like, as far as that expansion, and this goes back to a little bit less science, but that like making that higher loving choice of creation each time, it's like those patterns will repeat, you know, until we've learned from them and taken the next step just in a higher state of consciousness. And the next step, even with healing, I find that like, I thought I healed this, but it's always like, yeah, but you're at a new awareness. You have a new awareness to look at it. So you have to take it one more step. I feel like the whole universe, you know, works in that Fibonacci spiral, so to speak.
Yeah, certainly. Like, you know, I can relate with that 100%, where you're like, oh, I thought I've transmuted this. It's like you made a big step, but you just had to go around, integrate the rest of life, then come back to it to have a grander perspective, and then, you know, take the next step in it. At the end of the day, we are creation, and creation by default would have its best interest in mind. So it has our best interest in mind. We're living in a time where it feels like, you know, there's this Armageddon, everything's crashing, it's all ending, everybody's going crazy. Some people feel, you know, the power structures are amplifying, but it's all from the mind of God. So at the end of the day, you know, it comes down to what, you know, what we believe. Do we have that trust? And you know, my partner said something very true to me one time. She said, true faith wavers. You know, so if somebody's experiencing unwavering faith, maybe they can, but I think quite often it's like, if you're experiencing unwavering faith, maybe it's time to be like, am I just putting the oomph into saying, I believe, I believe? Is it a mantra and nothing more at this point? Or is it truly how I feel? You know, and if it's truly how we feel, we see that this is all, you know, this is all order. This is all order that's taking place. And it's all coming, like, man, we're in a time where this is coming to a head, you know. There's so many things that are really surfacing right now. The power structures are falling, certain sites are being unearthed, and mysteries are coming out. Certain societies are coming back out of the woodworks after 500, 600, 700 years. And you know, within the course of these past 5 years, it's been expedited tremendously. And of course, we think of 2012, you know, like we're in this mutable realm where yeah, same
2012.
wavelength,
Yeah.
where we're in this mutable wavelength of infinite potential. Some say that Nostradamus couldn't see past 2012. You know, I can't say for sure whether or not that's true, but I think it's a fascinating idea to toy with, because it's like, you know, if that is the case, you know, the timeline of humanity as a whole was kind of fixed up until that time when the Mayan calendar ended, and they said it was the end of the world. We have to ask, what is a world? Because it's not the end of the earth. It's the end of a paradigm or a society that's slowly over time dying off to make room for a new one. And that's where we're at with this dawning of the age of Aquarius.
2012, I got the whole download kind of thing of that by this point, going forward, people would start to see that things that they thought were unreal, mythical, never existed, whatever, everything was going to come to the forefront to the point they would be losing their minds if there weren't those of us who were the way showers and experienced it long before then going, welcome to our world. Please have a cookie.
Yeah.
Play along.
Just
play nice.
imagine. Yeah, just imagine diving into the deep end and you don't even have books or resources or other people to base this experience off of, Luckily, like we can have these awakenings and we have, each other to talk to, or even if you don't know anybody else, you can go online. Or you can find a library where there might be a book from, somebody who's talking about this, these concepts that you're thinking about are too far-fetched. Somebody already wrote about it,
I hear that a lot from my death experience and different things like, oh, are you sure you didn't read so-and-so and so-and-so? And Spirit literally told me, don't read that, just trust what we, in your own experiences, in your own things. But it's kind of funny that you say that because there are universal truths, so to speak. And I think, that the point is to speak your truth. It's authentic to you, and somebody might be experiencing that same truth as you would say, a frequency that you're aligning at. And, that awareness too, I've found within our groups as well, that I'm involved in a lot of spiritual groups and sharing type circles for near-death experiences and spiritually transformative experiences. And within that, if I find the more expansive and the more people talk about it and their experiences, other people who come in contact with that or connect with that or in that frequency of that start to have their own experiences because you're sharing all of that. And so I thank people so much like you that put this information out into the world in a way that, both sides of the coin can kind of relate to, because you have that scientific mind, but you also have the spiritual understandings of it. It's like that perfect merge of the divine feminine masculine. So it's very beautiful to hear you speak. So hence why I'm going back and forth a little bit with, some of the spiritual understandings I have, because you have both sides of that. So I thank you. There was one other question I wanted to ask you when you spoke of the Masons and their ability to form basically these bioacoustic type structures. Is that something you feel is like a lost art form, or do you think there are still societies that still have some of that knowledge of why they were created and how they were created?
I think largely it's lost. I think it will come back. I think it'll come back within our lifetime. But mainly what the remnants of that is just what was built before, that still stands. And even a lot of that, you could kind of see it conspiratorially even, that a lot of that gets tampered with. The Great Pyramid doesn't look like how it originally was. The Cathedral of Notre Dame, the fire behind that was kind of fishy. So, there are certain things that certain self-interest groups that don't really want that here. And if they have it here, they want it all under their control so they can put their own intent into the grid, right? Though I'm not so sure how well that works for them as far as karma and efficiency. But
the energetic balance, the Spirit told me I gotta keep. Yeah.
It is though. It's kind of a lost. It's kind of a lost art, like they would never build like this square room back in the day, or they would never put people in cubicles back in the day because, these when you're in a space, the walls, the floor and the ceiling, it's a mental construct, right? It's an agreement once again that, I'm projecting this reality that has these walls, this and that. And so as we're projecting the room as a feedback loop is coming back and affecting us. And if the room is just boxes and linear and strictly masculine, it puts us in that kind of space. There's, and once again, this is feng shui or what in Europe is often called geomancy. And this gets into, shapes. The feminine is the curve, the masculine is the linear. Oftentimes we see, like, you know, in stories or in horror movies, the attic is haunted. You know, the attic has all this terrible architecture to it. It's rigid, it's sharp corners, it pierces, you know, the energy. Or the basement is another place, you know, which it's resonant with this 6 feet below kind of wavelengths that we correlate with, you know, death and decay. And so all these things that sound so subjective, when you put it in the realm of physical structure and stuff like that, it becomes quite literal, and it does affect the mind and the emotions and so on and so forth. If you walk through a Vesica Pisces shape, which is at the entrance of every cathedral, you know, your body, the last place your body remembers that shape is when you were born, right? So it's literally a portal. It's the feminine portal to and from worlds, you know. So you start harnessing these shapes, and they speak to your biological system in certain ways. You can step in and out of dimensions quite literally, because what do we call height, width, and depth? We call it dimension. And it truly is.
I love your mind. Sorry. I'm
Appreciate it.
you know, and you gave me a new perception, because I wonder if that's why, like, Gothic and Victorian architecture speaks so much better to me, you know, because they had all those brown turrets and those, you know, and the
Yeah.
blends of different, you know, yeah. And a lot of the cathedrals were more Gothic as well, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. Gothic, you know, goth, meaning knowledge. Once again, you know, much like demon, you know, Gothic, demon, all this stuff that's supposed to be dark that we dichotomized really is, it's along the lines of alchemy, you know. Yeah, and you know, I'm not one to propose summoning things or, you know, this and that. I'm not into that. I just like to play, well, pun intended, devil's advocate, and kind of, you know,
My mother always
balance
yelled at me for
both
doing that
sides.
when I was a little kid after my first death experience. I'm like, but mom, it's this way, and you can look at it this way, but this way. It drove her crazy.
But you
Exactly.
know,
I think the
it
curious
keeps us
mind,
open-minded. Yeah,
yeah, it
yeah.
expands it.
With the architecture too, you know. So the Masons went from Masons to Freemasons. What did the free mean? You know, so free in one sense, they had eventually broken free from the confines of British Roman ruling, and they were able to express more esoteric aspects in their stonework. But also, there's a kind of stone that's called freestone. And freestone is a more delicate stone. It can be limestone, sandstone, but it's a kind of stone that can be chiseled in any which way. And it's for the more like ornamental kind of aspects of a cathedral or structure. And this was a whole metaphor to the Freemason, as far as, you know, if you're the freestone, you're something that you're someone who has, like we were saying, an open mind, somebody who can be, you know, malleable in a sense, to new information. You know, you can take on new principles and not be so fixed or rigid in your current beliefs, you know, and you can be formed and shaped just as, you know, the freestone is shaped.
I am being guided to ask you this, and I know it's totally not to do with any of this. Well, what is your perception of the Georgia Guidestones? Well, they don't exist now, thank you. But what do you think the purpose was behind them?
So from what I gathered, below them, there was a time capsule, and it could be theorized that that's why whatever happened not long ago happened. So the time capsule is like, that's a common approach of the Rosicrucians, the Priory of Sion. Even these groups are very similar. They're kind of like different arms of the same thing. Priory of Sion, Templars, the original Freemasons, not the corruption of that, and the Rosicrucian order. And what's the name of the town that the Guidestones are in? It was Ross, something Ross, but Ross means rose. And then you go into the guy who funded the building of the Guidestones, and his name was, what was it? Christian something, but he had the CR, you know, and they found that that's a pseudonym for him. His name really wasn't that. So there's a lot revolving around the Rosicrucians, perhaps, having something beneath those stones that the time came about that they were to pull it out and put it to use. You know, there's a lot of relics. There's even anatomical parts that when these things come to the surface, it's going to be kind of, we'll just say, damning to certain power structures that bank on our illusions, right?
Yes.
So as far as what could be in the time capsule, if it was even under there, that's completely open to interpretation. But there's a lot of Rosicrucian mystery that circles all around the Georgia Guidestones. Now, I know there's a whole view that those stones are calling for population control and this and that. But if you really read them, I don't think it has to imply that. I don't think it necessarily implies that. It's more so like a manifesto in stone for if we were to ever wipe out our race and had to rebuild, how we could rebuild and remain in alignment with nature. So
that's kind of how I took it. And I think it's interesting, the destruction came not long after someone put that final cornerstone in, but they broke right away and called it vandalism.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard that part, but my understanding, and I don't know exactly if it was from one of my experience or spiritual stuff, but was that by building it on the energy lines that it could be accessed through all the different timelines of times and space, because there are other timelines that are in apocalyptic type resonance. And there's different things I've seen that are supposed to come in this earthly timeline before like everything is beautiful and Eden again. So I always wondered if it was something to do with that like they had this understanding. So
yeah, a control panel, like the location of sites, as you're talking about, is very key with the grid or the ley lines that they might be on. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely an interesting take on that, where it could be like an access panel to an immortal or an eternal kind of space where all timelines are present. Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm trying to think when I came back with that understanding. I think it was like a quantum state experience, because there was like this niggling thing that wouldn't let go. Why are the Georgia Guidestones? And usually when I ask long enough, they eventually answer, because I'm kind of brat.
Tenacious. Yeah. Like she's
well,
persistent. All right, we'll give it to her.
well, there's certain things, like my daughter even got to the point with, Mom, stop asking the universe for clarification, because it'll either come or happen to them or me. And I'm like, she's like, I'm tired of being drug into this. And what did you ask now? She'll come here and she'll have experience. She'll come, Mom, did you ask about this? I'm like, actually, yeah, why? It's one of those.
Funny. Yep.
I'm like, well, because even though I've had so many experiences, I am very analytical, very skeptical. So I get where people are like, oh, well, you're talking, she's talking crazy, or why would she have this many experiences? All these things, because I'm stubborn.
Yeah. Hey, being called crazy or a charlatan in this world is a compliment.
That I know. Everyone's like, if you don't have haters, you're not doing it right.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
we live in a world where normal is war and money. So yeah, I'll gladly be crazy if
right?
that's the case, like.
And that's what I was going to ask you, before we wrap up here, is that that has a lot to do with frequency. Like the higher your frequency, I tell people, because there's it creates a dissonance. It's this friction. Each person has a higher understanding and a higher thing that they take in. Those frequencies don't quite meet. So I never take it personal if somebody doesn't like me. They're just not resonating. There's things that I didn't resonate with even 5 years ago, and now I'm going, oh God, I was kind of obtuse. Right? So I mean, is that how you see it? Like as far as why these personalities don't necessarily, as you do your own learning and expansion. I think that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, yeah. When we clash in terms of frequency, which once again could be expressed as emotion or personality trait or color or our archetype. When we clash, we kind of can repel, but there's also like a divine intervention in the fact that we clash too. A measurement for electrical resistance, right? When there's a resistance in electrical terms, it's called ohm, OHM.
Right.
It's fascinating that the guy who discovered electrical resistance, his name was Ohm. Like, the guy who discovered the heartbeat of the earth, his name is Schumann, very much like shaman. How did that come to be, But yeah, no,
That's what I call spirit humor.
yeah, it plays jokes and tricks all throughout. And when we catch on, we're like, oh man, this thing is multifaceted, Yeah. But yeah, back to what you were asking, I think it plays everything into how we interact, how we socialize, if we're open, if we're in a, say two people are in a fight or flight state, there's not going to be, there's not going to be much connection. We've all experienced that. If we're in a debate with somebody and we both get louder and louder, you're hearing them, but you are not listening. There's that difference there. Like you're just the words are going in, but you're projecting. So it's not being received, So it's all frequency, yeah, positive and negative. If you have two people who are negative, then nobody's talking. You're meditating together, If you have positive and negative and you alternate, then that's what's happening between you and I right now. We're having a conversation. So.
And a beautiful one at that. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You are so welcome. And one last question. If there was one understanding you wanted to give from all the work you do and the research that you've done, what would you want to impart to people before you wrap up?
That we can see, we can always see the order in the chaos. As dark as a subject might seem, there's a silver lining to it. As light as a subject might seem, there can be a dark side to it. One of the best practices I feel we can do is think of the lightest thing and find the darkness in it, and then think of the darkest thing and find the lightness in it. And in doing that, we start to kind of come towards the center path to where, like if you look at the tree of life, for example, in the Kabbalah, there's the left-hand path and the right-hand path. They're limited though. They have to go down to the center to complete the whole shape, to whereas the center goes through the whole thing. So you can get the totality of the life experience by being in the center, or which in our body is being in the heart space, right? Where we see instead of look, or we listen instead of just hear, So there's always the polarity within the other polarity. So at the end of the day, anything that we dichotomize, it's just from our mind. It's just a subjective idea. And really the truth is that, everything is a unified field.
Thank you so much, Trevor. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. I thank you for being here and for being you and the work you do.
Likewise, absolutely appreciated.
And I thank everyone for joining us. If you want more information about Trevor, it'll be below in his biography. And thank you again for tuning in. Have a blessed day.